My mom moved to Antarctica, so the only way that I can communicate with her now is through this YouTube channel. So, hi Mom, send Dad my love. Today we're going to be talking about the Sony 50mm F1.8 lens. It's a lens that's made for full frame lenses like the A7S III and the A7 III, but we're going to use it on the Sony ZV-E10 and we are going to consider the crop factor that ensues. The equivalent focal length is about 75mm, which makes it a perfect portrait lens for photography or an interview talking head type of lens. Being that we can take the aperture all the way down to f1.8, you can get a pretty good blurry background. Compared to other cameras like the Sony ZV-1, when you fully zoom in with the ZV-1, you get f2.8 on your aperture and it gives you a background that looks like this. Here's the ZV-1 zoomed all the way in. I can't remember the focal length that you get when you zoom in with the ZV-1. It's like 70 or 72. And then once you zoom all the way in with the ZV-1, it also raises the aperture to f2.8. So this is the kind of background that you get with the ZV-1. I picked this lens up because I didn't have a prime lens and I wanted a good lens that had a low aperture so that I could have a nice blurry background for headshots and interviews and things like that. And this lens is pretty cheap. Well, cheap if you've become well acquainted with how expensive lenses are for your cameras. This lens does not have stabilization, so if you're planning on going handheld for video, then I would recommend at least picking up a gimbal. And being that you're at 75mm with this lens, it doesn't make it the best lens in the world for moving type shots. Speaking about gimbals, a brand new gimbal just came out. They sent it to me and I'm gonna review it for you guys. And the reason I got the EF mount lens is so that I could use this lens on the full frame cameras that I have. But if you only have a crop sensor camera, then I would highly recommend you pick up the E mount lens, which is about $100 more, but it does have stabilization. The lens itself only has one ring on it, and that's to pull focus. The filter thread size, if you want to add ND filters and things to the outside of the lens, is at 49mm, which means you may need a step-up ring if you have bigger ND filters. As far as autofocus goes, it's not the fastest or the quietest, but once it hits focus, it's super sharp. But if you're not going to use this lens for moving type shots and you're only using it for headshots, for interviews and YouTube videos and things like that.
I'm looking at Todd and then camera, then you.
Yeah.
Look, no one understands the industry more than Mike.
Specializing with families and specializing with kids to teach scuba courses. Retake.
The autofocus is not a problem at all. All I do is I let the autofocus focus in on my subject and then I switch it over to manual. It is a prime lens, and prime lenses are generally sharper than lenses that you can adjust the focal length, mainly because there's less glass for the light to travel through. That's also why you can get more of a blurry background. I did use this lens on my last video on how music can change a scene out in the woods so that you guys could get a really good idea of how the blurry background looks, and I was shooting that with the A7S III. 95% of my projects are video projects, but this lens is great for photography. Let's take a look at some of the images that I got with this lens and camera setup to see how sharp those images are. There's a noticeable difference on how sharp the image is, and I think it has to do with how blurry the background gets, because it really does separate the subject from the background. You can see in these photos that I took how sharp the edges are, and also how bright the subject is compared to the background, and that just has to do with that 1.8 aperture. I wonder how this lens compares to the kit lens. Let me know in the comment section if you guys would like to see me do a comparison video on those two lenses. I think this lens is perfect for photographers or photographers, for people who don't know how to say it, filmmakers, and really anybody who does any type of headshot interviews or YouTube videos. Probably gonna use this lens as my primary lens when it comes to talking head type shots, but I'm also going to use it in case I ever have to do portrait photography for someone who might want a picture of themselves. Thanks for watching. We kept this one short. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance, and until the next video, peace. My mom moved to Antarctica, and the only way I can communicate with her